What follows are my initial thoughts and reactions to this book of the Bible. I have not done any outside research regarding the more challenging or problematic passages of Christian scripture. Therefore, do not take whatever criticisms I may make in this video as my final word on the passage or verse in question. I am very likely going to be doing a Bible Revisited series addressing my different issues with the Bible, book by book, after conducting ample outside research. So now, without further ado, let's jump into the review. So 1 Samuel is yet another book from the Old Testament of the Bible, and it was possibly written by Samuel, maybe a couple other authors, but kind of the purpose of 1 Samuel is to document how Israel goes from being just a straight up theocracy with no king to kind of becoming more of a monarchy with a king. And some key players are obviously Samuel, and then there's King Saul, and then later King David, and there's also Goliath in here, obviously. And yeah, the book is really it's not so much like a lot of the Old Testament books. A lot of them are just kind of like instructual or whatever. This book is far more just like a story, like a recording of events and conversations. 1 Samuel is possibly my favorite book of the Old Testament so far, reading through it anyways. It's so, I mentioned just a second ago, like the whole book is written like a normal book. Like most of the Old Testament books, at least before Samuel, it's kind of dry language. There's not a whole lot of like descriptive detail. 1 Samuel, on the other hand, is written almost like a novel. Like it's very, very story-like in its representation, and I got a whole lot out of Samuel. Not necessarily like there's not like a whole bunch of verses in 1 Samuel that are like that speak to me specifically. There are some, and we'll go over them. But it's more like 1 Samuel, you get to know really three characters, and they all show you something that you can either emulate or something that you really don't want to emulate at all. And so I got a whole lot out of 1 Samuel, and yeah, I mean, it's truly like, it's super epic, I've got to say. I mean, there are a couple things here and there in 1 Samuel that I'm like, really? That's problematic. But for the most part, 1 Samuel I just thought was incredibly awesome, absolutely fascinating, and will read again, obviously, someday, because it really was a truly like just badass story. So ladies and gentlemen, that was my brief description of the premise, and it was also my brief kind of thoughts and review of just how I felt about 1 Samuel. Now let's go ahead and jump into the book. Let's talk about the different passages in Samuel, different chapters of Samuel, different aspects of Samuel that I really found very fascinating, very powerful, or problematic. Basically, let's just get into the textual analysis and discussion of 1 Samuel. Now keep in mind, most of these things that I marked are just simply things that spoke to me specifically. There's a lot to get out of 1 Samuel that I did not underline or whatever, but that's just because if I underlined all that stuff, these videos would be just too long. They're already long, so I don't want to just add more for the sake of adding more when you could just read the book yourself, which you should do. Now this first passage I would like to read comes from 1 Samuel chapter 3, and this is going to be verses 11 to 18. And the reason I'm looking at this passage is this has to do with God's punishment of Eli. Eli was a very highly respected, I believe he was a priest, right? Yeah. And he was very well respected and whatnot, but he didn't really discipline his sons, and his sons kind of gave the church a little bit of a bad name, did some very mischievous things, and Eli did not really punish his sons. And for that, God punishes Eli. And I'm just going to read the passage now. And keep in mind, there's obviously a whole lot more context here, but can't read the whole book. And the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears of it tingle. At that time I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family, from beginning to end. For I had told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons made themselves contemptible, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. Samuel lay down until morning and then opened the doors of the house of the Lord. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision. But Eli called him and said, Samuel, my son. Samuel answered, Here I am. What was it he said to you? Eli asked. Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you. So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing from him. Then Eli said, He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes. Now, first of all, before we discuss this passage, I would like to discuss just a little bit about, the beginning of Samuel is very beautiful. God grants Hannah a child. She was barren before, but she prayed and basically dedicated herself and, to God, basically, and just was like, I will do whatever to have a child. And he granted her Samuel. And it's just a beautiful little story. But anyways, moving on. The reason I wanted to discuss this passage is specifically because, and the reason I read so much, is specifically because of Eli's response to being told that his family is going to be severely punished beyond his imagination almost. Eli's response is, it says, Then Eli said, He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes. I just found that, when I read that, I just found that very compelling. Just the acceptance of, I have done wrong, this is my punishment, I should not complain because this is the Lord's will. I don't know, I just find that whole idea of doing that to be very striking. The guy, clearly Eli really was in the service of God, even though he made mistakes with his children. Eli was not trying to rebel, I guess, from God, but he was anyways. But this acceptance of the coming punishment shows that Eli's faith was extremely strong in God, and that and that he knew that he deserved what was coming for him. I don't know what I would do if I was told you're going to be punished so severely because you did something wrong that your whole family is going to suffer. I doubt I would say the same thing that Eli said. I don't know, that takes some serious backbone and humility, I guess. And what's really cool about 1 Samuel, Samuel, he's like the last kind of judge of Israel, spiritual leader. And I really like the character of Samuel. There's this whole section of the book where the Ark of the Covenant is stolen from the Israelites, and then it's brought back, and Samuel kind of has to lead the people throughout all of this. And it's all very fascinating. But honestly, Samuel, even though the book is titled 1 Samuel, he is not the most compelling character in this book. The most compelling characters are King Saul and King David. And how this all begins is the Israelites, if you'll remember if you read the book, they kind of become dissatisfied with being the last people in their area to not have a king. They want to be like everyone else. They want to, I guess, fit in with how the world governs its countries. And this displeases Samuel, but he goes to God, and this is what happens. So this is verse 6 of 1 Samuel chapter 8. But when they said, Give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. As they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them. But warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do. Basically, God, it sounds like, is going to punish the Israelites by giving them exactly what they want, which is a king. But of course, kings are people, and they can be tyrants, as we all know throughout history. And in this book, you come to realize that Saul is very much not the greatest guy. We'll get into Saul in a second, but I just found that fascinating God was going to grant them something that they desperately wanted as a punishment to them. And almost like as a curse. It's like, okay, you want to be like everyone else? Then fine. Let's see how you like it. And, well, spoiler alert, they don't like it all that much later. And real quick, I'm not going to go over any verses particularly, but how Saul is chosen as king is pretty fascinating. He's just like looking for like lost sheep, and he comes to a town where Samuel is, and Samuel like I think he had like a dream or something, or a vision, and God tells him, you're gonna find this kid in your village and you're gonna make him king, basically. And that's what happened. I mean, there's obviously some more peripheral details in there, but it's a real fish out of water thing. Saul's just like a random like normal guy, and he just all of a sudden is anointed king over Israel. Like, whoa. And the character of Saul, like, while he proves to be kind of crazy and immoral and not a good king, you do start to see that Saul is, he's not like all bad. Like, for instance, this would be 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 12 and 13. I really like this about Saul. So some people had asked, you know, whenever Saul first became king, like, why Saul? Like, why should he reign over us? And basically, Saul rescues the city of Jabesh, and then what happens in verse 12 is the people then said to Samuel, who was it that asked, shall Saul reign over us? Bring these men to us, and we will put them to death. And then verse 13, but Saul said, no one shall be put to death today, for this day the Lord has rescued Israel. This is very interesting. This is where at least it looks like the Old Testament is starting to get a little bit more, I don't know, mercy is coming more into play. Because if that verse had been in the book of Judges or Deuteronomy, yeah, they would have put to death all those naysayers probably. I mean, that's just kind of how those books read. I mean, but here, Saul shows mercy, even though there were dissenters for his reign. And I was like, good, awesome. Good for you, Saul. Now we come to 1 Samuel chapter 12, verses 19 through 25. And the reason I want to read this passage is not only does it have to do with the whole, you know, Israelites calling for a king and then not really liking a king, it shows a really, really admirable characteristic in Samuel that I really think should be talked about. The people all said to Samuel, pray to the Lord your God for your servants so that we will not die, for we have added to all our other sins the evil of asking for a king. Do not be afraid, Samuel replied. You have done all this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn away after useless idols. They can do you no good, nor can they rescue you, because they are useless. For the sake of his great name, the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own. As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. And I will teach you the way that is good and right. But be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. Yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will be swept away. What I really like about that passage, specifically verse 23, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. Remember, these are the people, like Samuel was like, hey, a king is not a good idea. And the people were like, no, we want a king, dude. And Samuel's like, okay, well, fine, here's your king. And then the king acts up and, you know, does some egregious things, and all the people are like, dude, sorry, we don't want a king anymore, forgive us, please. And Samuel, any normal person would be like, no, you asked for this, I gave it to you, and now you've got the consequences to bear. But instead Samuel says, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. He's praying for the people that have opposed him and treated him like crap. And I just find that it's very counter to human nature. Most of the time we just want to rub these things in people's faces, like, oh yeah, I gave you what you wanted, now you gotta eat that crap. Well, Samuel now is like, no, I'm gonna pray to God so that he saves you, and so that you don't turn away from him. That's That's what the whole idea of love is in the Bible, loving your enemy. And in this passage, it's not necessarily that the people are Samuel's enemy, but they are opposed. They have been opposed to him, and they would not listen to him before. And instead of holding a grudge towards them, he just starts praying for him. It's beautiful. Now we're going to skip ahead to 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 43 to 45. Basically, in this passage, Jonathan had not heard that Saul had basically said, "Cursed be the man who eats any food today until we have, destroyed our enemies." Jonathan did not hear this. Jonathan is Saul's son. And Jonathan ate some honey off of the ground. And then basically Saul confronts Jonathan about this. And it gets pretty interesting. I'm going to go ahead and read. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." So Jonathan told him, "I merely tasted a little honey with the end of my staff. And now I must die?" Saul said, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die, Jonathan." But the men said to Saul, Should Jonathan die, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never. As surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he did this today with God's help. So the men rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. That's just, I don't know, just that passage, it's like, thank goodness. Normalcy, like something you would normally expect. Like, of course you don't put him to death. He didn't know. It's not like he deliberately disobeyed. Just because he ate honey anyways, like, is that really a penalty of death? Luckily, the men opposed Saul in this, and they rescued him from getting put to death. And I don't know, that's just, when you just come out of reading like Judges and Joshua and Deuteronomy, a passage like this seems almost a little bit foreign, but in a good way. That's all I'm trying to say. Now in 1 Samuel chapter 15, we now kind of start talking about the brutality of the Old Testament that I still have real difficulty with. This is the opening of chapter 15, and it goes to verse 3. Samuel said to Saul, "I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people, Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." Now, I've mentioned many times before in my other Bible book reviews of the Old Testament how I just don't understand how the killing of children and infants is okay, how that can be justified. And this is particularly, this and also just like the killing of the firstborn in Egypt are particularly difficult things to wrap my head around because these are God-ordered things. And in the case of the Egyptians, like, it was God doing it. Now in here, God is commanding that Saul kill the men and women, children and infants. Now men and women, people that they can be wicked and evil, but children and infants, I don't think so. And so I don't understand the rationale here. I mean, it's just utter brutality commanded by God. And it's hypocritical too. Now the justification, like I have a life application version of the Bible where it's got notes, footnotes. The justification for slaying the Amalekites and other peoples in the Old Testament is because they were wicked people who killed innocent people and who did awful evil things. The Israelites just did the same exact stuff by God's command, but they did it to the Amalekites. Now why is it okay for them but not for others to do this horrible stuff? Like, what is the whole, like, it's like they're punishing the Amalekites for being awful and evil and wicked by being awful and evil and wicked. But the only difference is God's on their side for some reason. And I'm like, I don't feel like the justification of saying, well, they're God's chosen people, so therefore they can do this. I don't buy that. It seems very morally inconsistent. And I know that the Israelites were later punished by God for many things, but it doesn't here, they were ordered to do these evil things. In chapter 15, they were ordered by God, who's supposed to be holy and good and who's supposed to protect the innocents. And if anyone can explain to me why it's okay why it's not inconsistent for God to command the Israelites to do these things, yeah, please answer those questions in the comment section below, because I don't know what's going on. There's another verse in chapter 15 that I'd also like to touch on, which is verse 29, and it reads, "He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a man that he should change his mind." That sounds okay, but whenever I've read the Old Testament, back whenever Moses was still around, there were many times where God would say, he's going to do all these horrible things as punishment on the Israelites or on others. And then Moses would pray to God, asking for mercy, and God would not do these horrible things as punishment towards these people. It very much seemed like he changed his mind. Anyone knows how that's not incongruous, please leave your answer in the comment section below. Now I'd like to jump to chapter 16 of 1 Samuel and talk about the introduction of David. Now, I really only want to talk about the one very famous verse, which is verse 7. But basically, as many people, if you're familiar with the story of David and Goliath, David is he's not like a big man. He's widely considered, at least in that time, as like a boy, like a kid. And so he's the last person you would expect to become king over Israel. And Samuel is being sent to look for the next king of Israel. And he sees this guy who looks like a king, who's tall and strong and all that sort of stuff. But that guy does not end up being the king of Israel. And this is what God says whenever Samuel is appraising this person. I'll read verse 6 actually, for context. "When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, 'Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord.' But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.'" Your character is what matters. And David's character is what mattered for him to be king. Who he is on the inside. And so, yes, he wasn't brawny and big like this guy Eliab, but he was more worthy of the crown than Eliab anyways, because he was simply a better guy. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to chapter 17, which is one of the most epic chapters in the entire book, if not the most epic chapter in the entire book of 1 Samuel. This is the story of David and Goliath. Obviously, I can't read the whole chapter. There's one passage I do want to read. The story of David and Goliath is so cool. It's so much cooler than all the representations and freaking videos people have put out on YouTube or whatever. I mean, this is a rated R story that is hardcore. It's also so epically written. It's written like a scene out of the Lord of the Rings or something. It's so epic. What a cool story. And everyone knows the story in and of itself. David's got a slingshot. He's a little kid basically. And there's Goliath, who's over 9 feet tall. Goliath's taunting him. David comes out with a slingshot, hits him right in the head with a stone. And what a lot of people don't realize is that's not actually how Goliath died. I want to read a passage to you. This is what David says. This is what people don't have in any visual representations like in movies or Bible videos or whatever. Nobody seems to want to include this. I don't know why. This is verses 45 to 47. I'm just going to read it. This is super epic stuff right here. "David said to the Philistine," Goliath, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Good grief, that's awesome. And you know what? You know what happened? Exactly that. What David did is he used a slingshot, stone hit Goliath right in the center of the forehead so hard that he fell over, basically was, knocked out. But he didn't die from that. What David did, this is what's so cool, and when you read the story, you just can't even believe what you're reading. What David did is he walked over to Goliath, took Goliath's sword out of its sheath, and then cut off Goliath's head. And then he also brought it back to Saul later. It's such an epic story that is so not represented as well as it should be in all forms of media. It's so epic, and reading it, I was just having the best time. Just oh my gosh, this is epic. It needs to be put in a movie, and it needs to be rated freaking R. Now what's weird is later in that same chapter, this would be verse 55 to 58, it seems like Saul doesn't know who David is, even though Saul has known David for a decent amount of time at this point. I kind of skipped over it, but David plays this harp to ward off basically demons from attacking Saul. And so Saul clearly knows who David is, I think. At least that's established. But then you read this, which reads, this is after the whole David and Goliath thing, verse 55. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, O king, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." This doesn't make really much sense. Now, there's a footnote that I think is somewhat helpful in my Bible, but it certainly seems like Saul knew who David was before this, and then all of a sudden he doesn't know who he is. It's weird. I'm going to read the footnote though anyways. Although David had played his harp many times in front of Saul, Saul's question to Abner seems to show he didn't know David very well. Perhaps since David was scheduled to marry Saul's daughter if he was successful, Saul wanted to know more about his family. Or possibly Saul's unstable mental condition may have prevented him from recognizing David. Now that's interesting, and that may very well be true. I mean, Saul is kind of losing his mind because of the whole demon torment that he's undergoing in this book. But it is weird. Now, along with that whole demon torment thing, I do think we should address that, because over and over again, Saul is tormented by an evil spirit. But what's interesting is that the phrasing, whenever this evil spirit is introduced, is pretty much always the same, and it reads like this. This is, for instance, verse 10 of chapter 18. "The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully upon Saul." Now, when you read that, you're like, wait a minute. From God? Did God send an evil spirit? Was he working with the devil to mess with Saul? What's going on here? And I think there's really two ways to read this. You can either read it as God sent an evil spirit to Saul, which seems very problematic. Why would God... It seems like, isn't God's imperative to not, work with the devil? So there's that way you could read it, which would be very contradictory, I think, in the scope of the Bible. Or you can read that kind of phrasing of these evil spirit interactions as God simply, since Saul was such a disobedient king to God, God simply didn't protect him anymore. It's just fine, I'm not going to protect you from this stuff. And evil spirits came and tormented Saul that way. That's possible. It's not said explicitly that way, though. I don't really know which way to go on that on that verse or the verses that are like that in this book, but I think those are the two ways you can look at it. Now, I have no passages for this next thing I want to discuss, but I have to say the friendship between David and Jonathan in the book of 1 Samuel is so awesome. It's like a Sam and Frodo level friendship. It's super cool. I love it. To be truthful, I want to see a King David movie. It would be so cool. For instance, in chapter 21, David is on the run from Saul, and he is in Nob. And there's this priest there named Ahimelech. David is he needs a sword. He's just trying to get in there and get out anyways, he meets with this priest guy, and he asks for a sword. Do you have like a sword or anything like that? And the priest is like, he replies, verse 9, the priest replied, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one. David said, there is none like it. Give it to me. I don't know, it would just be a cool scene in a movie. That's all I wanted to say. It's just cool. It's just super cool. Now, I would really like to talk just for a little bit, just about the qualities of David that make him like a good king and admirable. Because I think even though that he's done some things in First Samuel that are kind of egregious when we talked about him earlier, he's a very interesting character, complex character. There are aspects of him that are extremely admirable, and there are other aspects that are not. I really like this passage. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you feel free to read it. This is 1 Samuel chapter 22, verses 14 through 23. Basically what happens is Saul is being a crazy person, and he is basically like, he finds out about Ahimelech, the guy who gave David Goliath's sword. Basically, Saul finds out about this, confronts Ahimelech, the priest, and his other associated priests or whatever. And Saul is like, you let him get away, and therefore you're gonna be put to death. And Saul looks to his guards, and they don't want to put the priests of God to death. And then Saul looks to this one particular guy named Doeg, and he says, you turn and strike down the priests. And Doeg does this. He strikes down the priests. And then really what I want to talk about is, but Abiathar, a son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub the priest, escaped and fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Then David said to Abiathar, that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul. Oh yeah, I forgot. Doeg had witnessed David and Ahimelech before Saul came. He was the informant. I knew he would be sure to tell Saul. I am responsible for the death of your father's whole family. Stay with me, don't be afraid. The man who is seeking your life is seeking mine also. You will be safe with me. I really like this passage because it shows extreme ownership. David is the kind of leader who's like, you know what? That's my fault. Yes, I didn't do any of the evil or whatever, but it's my fault that your family died, and I'm going to protect you. I just find that a very admirable quality. For sure. Another admirable quality of David's that I find really cool is there are several times when he is able, he's in a position where he could kill Saul, but he doesn't do it. He always shows mercy. And it's like David at one point I believe he snuck into Saul's camp, stole Saul's spear, and then he went up on a hill and started talking to Saul, woke him up, and was like, here's your spear. And I'll just read that passage. This is verse 22 of chapter 26. Here's the king's spear, David answered. Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble. He's a merciful guy, at least for the most part, which leads us to the next page of the Bible, which is verse 9 of chapter 27, where it says, whenever David attacked an area, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but took sheep and cattle, donkeys and camels and clothes. So David is both merciful and wrathful. He's a complex character is what I'm getting at. Certainly not a perfect man, but for the time he was, I guess, ahead of the pack. Now, I'm not going to read any of chapter 28, but I do have to touch on chapter 28. There's ghosts in the Bible, legit ghosts. Saul is losing his mind. He decides that he's going to contact a woman who can get him in touch with the dead, and he wants to speak to Samuel specifically. Samuel had died at this point. And this woman conjures up Samuel, and it's very fascinating. Samuel's like, why have you brought me up? I was okay. Why have you brought me up here? And it's like Saul legit talks to the spirit of Samuel, like as a ghost. Obviously there are visions and spirits and stuff all throughout the Bible, but this is the most a ghost story of any of the stories. Now, the last passage I would like to read in this book is chapter 31, the first 6 verses of chapter 31. I'll just read it and then we'll talk. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. Now I'd like to read one of the footnotes that has to do with Saul's death. Saul faced death the same way he faced life. He took matters into his own hands without thinking of God or asking for his guidance. If our lives aren't the way we would like them to be now, we can't assume that change will come more easily later. When nearing death, we will respond to God the same way we have been responding all along. Coming face to face with death only shows us what we are really like. How do you want to face death? Start facing life that way right now. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on the book of 1 Samuel. I thought it was an amazing book, epic book, super fun to read, fascinating, absolutely, highly recommend, obviously. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I've talked way too much, so I want to now hear what you thought of 1 Samuel. If you read it, please leave any questions, comments, thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe. Tell your friends about the channel. And never forget to